great volatile period of time, and I love volatility. That's great. So, like I said, I mean, I've been trying to find things not to read. I've read a little bit, but I haven't been writing it all this week. So, shucks, that's another week down from me, Bradford. I've got to tighten up. I've got to tighten up, indeed. But nevertheless, today I'm going to be speaking about the secular evolutionary worldview, particularly in relation to the concept of progress. This paper that I sent out is in process too, but it's been published in another format, but much longer, probably about 35 to 40 pages, whereas I chopped it up to about 10 to fit into a nice little discussion period of time. So it may not flow exactly apropos, so to speak, if I may say, if I may conjugate the term in that manner. But nevertheless, in this essay, one will find an exposition of the overarching secular evolutionary worldview, or SEW, of the biological sciences. The core of the SEW is well summarized by George Gaylord Simpson, who noted in the middle of the 20th century, early to mid 20th century, yeah. Anyway, man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind. He was not planned. He is a state of matter, a form of life, a sort of animal, in fact, and a species of the order of primates, akin nearly or remotely to all of life, and indeed to all that is material. So then, secular science, secular evolutionary worldview science, if you will, is grounded in Darwinian evolution. Carl Sagan, the biophysicist, I believe it would be the proper appellation for him, states that evolution is a fact, not a theory. Huxley, that's T.H. Huxley, Thomas Henry Huxley, claims the first point to make about Darwin's theory is that it's no longer a theory, but a fact. Darwinianism, that's a strange conjugation, but it makes sense. Darwinianism has come to age, so to speak. We do not any longer have to bother about establishing the fact of evolution. Now, that was written in the late 19th, early 20th century. I can't place it, but that was the time period in which he lived, in the late 19th / early 19th. But regardless, Antony Flew, who was the famous atheist who converted later in life back to Christianity, if you will. Well, maybe not back to Christianity, but I think he did convert to Christianity, or maybe Judaism. I can't recollect. But regardless, no. he was a believer later in life, right? But he was a vociferous atheist for much of his life. And during this atheistic period of time of his life, he noted that he was scandalized by the notion that there was a time when the Vatican, unbelievably, questioned the fact of the evolutionary origin of the species. In what follows, I will first define what my little perspective on worldview, what it connotes and what it contains and so forth like that, because it's only after defining worldview appropriately that I can then shift to the individual scholars. That is Elliot, Sober, and Michael Ruse primarily, although I do include a couple of anthologies, which I've deleted all of my citations from this, what have you, because it takes up space. But anyway, I will then, after defining the notion of worldview, then highlight the notion of progress and its relation to the secular evolutionary worldview. The meaning of the term worldview seems self-evident. An intellectual perspective on the world or on the universe. But it has many characteristics. Indeed, the online edition of the Collins English Dictionary defines worldview as a comprehensive, especially personal philosophy or conception of the world and of human life. The Collins English Dictionary similarly defines the German noun Weltanschauung. Probably butchered that, but nevertheless, so be it. Weltanschauung, from which we get our term worldview in the English language, as a comprehensive, especially personal philosophy or conception of the universe and of human life. Notably, in the question of Weltanschauung, pardon my interpretation again, or pardon my pronunciation again, from his new introductory lectures in psychoanalysis, Freud describes Weltanschauung as an intellectual construction which solves all the problems of our existence uniformly on the basis of one overriding hypothesis, which accordingly leaves no question unanswered, and in which everything that interests us finds its fixed place. It leaves no question unanswered. That's that's a pretty bold assertion for anything that we consider a worldview, leaving no question unanswered and uniformly defining stuff and so forth. But this does not mean, I contend, that the term worldview, as I use it herein, does not have other connotations, some of which I'll now unpack. In a Christian book that I read back when I was a pastor from post 2000 for that many year period, but anyway, I can't remember exactly when I read it, but regardless, in Discipleship of the Mind, James W. Sire, I think this is an important point that adds to the definition of worldview previously referenced by Freud and so forth like that. But Sire defines worldview as a set of presuppositions which we hold about the makeup of the world. Worldview, then, represents one's most fundamental beliefs and assumptions about the universe as they inhabit it. It reflects how he or she would answer fundamental questions about who we are and what we are, where we came from, etc. Worldviews then operate at both the individual level and at the societal level. Rarely will two people, even more so in my case, right? But rarely will two people ever have the same worldview. But within any society, certain worldview types are prominently represented more so than others, and therefore exert greater influence on the culture of that society. The elements of one's worldview, the beliefs about certain aspects of ultimate reality, are one's epistemology, which I define as beliefs about the nature and sources of knowledge. The elements of one's worldview also contains metaphysics, which could be defined as beliefs about the nature of ultimate reality. The elements of one's worldview also contains notions regarding anthropology, which could be defined as beliefs about the nature and purpose of humanity in general, and oneself in particular. The notion of worldview also contains elements of axiology, which could be defined as beliefs about the nature of value, what is good and bad, what is right and wrong, etc. Almost lastly, at least what I want to point out anyway, the elements of one's worldview also contains notions regarding one's cosmology, which I define here as beliefs about the origins and nature of the universe, life, and especially humanity. And finally, at least what I like to highlight, what I would like to highlight about elements of worldview, it contains one's theology, which could be defined as beliefs about the existence of nature and the existence of God and his or her nature, one's theology. So then, one's epistemology, one's metaphysics, one's anthropology, one's axiology, one's cosmology, and one's theology is contained within the notion of a worldview, as I understand it best. The various definitions just given, that was with respect to axiology, anthropology, and so forth like that, are all essentially in accord with one another. However, it is in Freud's sense of the meaning of Weltanschauung, Weltanschauung, yeah, that I'll be using something like that. I'm going to get right sooner or later.
Weltanschauung.
Okay, very well. It's in his reference to that term, to that German term, that I will be using the term worldview in this essay. As such, a worldview is a set of beliefs about fundamental aspects of reality that ground and influence and pervade, you could say, all of one's perceiving, all of one's knowing, all of one's thinking, all of one's doing. Since the patristic era, Western civilization largely has been dominated by a Christian worldview. But in the last couple of centuries, both for technological and theological reasons, but most explicitly because of scientific reasons, the traditional Christian worldview has been supplanted and has lost its dominance. And competing worldviews have become far more prominent, including at least the following that I'd like to point out. Modernism, that is the notion that all things in the physical world can be explained by modern scientific presuppositions and processes. Two, postmodernism, that is, that there are very few or no objective truths and moral standards. Reality, in this view, is nothing more than a human construction. Thirdly, pantheism, that is the notion that God is the sum of all reality, and that each thing or entity within reality, that is also itself divine. And then fourthly, pluralism, that is that different world religions represent equally valid pathways and perspectives on God. As such, there's no ultimate pathway to God, and that there are many pathways instead, many valid pathways to salvation instead. Fifthly, panentheism, which is different than the third one I mentioned, pantheism, because it has the en in it. Panentheism that contends that God is the totality of reality. However, while God is in all things, He's also more than all things at the same time. And sixthly, the last one I'd like to point out, ontological naturalism, whereby there is no God. Humans are just highly evolved animals. The universe is a closed system, etc. It is this last worldview that is predominant within the biological sciences today, in which I have deemed the secular evolutionary worldview, SEW. Moving on to progress, I will note parenthetically here that I'm a proponent of panentheism. That is the notion that God is in all things, but that God pervades everything, but God is also more than the world at the same time. With that little aside, let me step into progress. Progress defined and defended. A famous scholar once said, it's from the biological sciences. I can't remember exactly who it was right now, but because I've deleted my footnotes. But regardless, I do think that the process of progress has happened, although I find it very hard to define precisely what I mean by the term, and so forth. The Christian, notably, Louis Agassiz, whatever. That's what I'm going to pronounce it. Contributes much to the secular evolutionary worldview. It may seem strange to start a secular evolutionary worldview paper on a Christian who was deliberate in his advocation, even belligerent and pugnacious in his advocation of the Christian worldview. One who is in many ways a progenitor of the not so modern creationist movement, but I will do so regardless, for his notion of progress serves as the foundation level of the secular evolutionary worldview's view of progress and their response to that progress. Indeed, John Louis Rudolphi Agassiz, whatever, was a Christian paleontologist who is often recognized as the founder of glaciology and the glacial geology and so forth. But nevertheless, and more commonly known as Louis Agassiz, whatever, he proposed and argued for a threefold parallelism with respect to progress, in so much as the order of living beings, the ontogenetic development of individual organisms, and the history of life, as seen in the fossil record, all gave evidence to the notion of progress being exhibited in the natural, or in his sense, created world. Indeed, claimed Louis Agassiz, the unifying thread of all reality, but especially that of the earth, is that of progress. From simple to complex, from the uniform to the highly differentiated, from monad to man. Therefore, there's a scala natura all the way from invertebrates to rodents to primates to mankind. For all the problems with Agassiz' proposal, it had and has influence beyond anything that he could have asked or imagined, ever envisioned, in fact. Michael Ruse, picking up on Agassiz, or how do you say that name, um, argues for a modern day threefold parallelism that is somewhat akin to his. That is, between the development of society, the development of science, and the evolutionary development of organisms, threefold. Ruse argues that the history of Darwinism as a movement can be understood only as an expression of the idea of social and anthropic process, that is, humanity-based anthropic process, or progress, rather, I should say. He believes that the scientific credentials of the theory of evolution were never strong enough to convince anyone not predisposed to accept it on ideological grounds. Therefore, he thinks that Darwin and subsequent of Darwin sort of hijacked the notion of progress in order to make it more palatable to his readers and so forth. Ruse also stresses the extent to which the founders of the synthesis, circa 1930 to 1945-ish thereabout, still clung to the concept of progression as philosophy so popular in the previous century. Indeed, Ruse is keen to point out that the idea of progress and biological advancement was not quick to disappear, persisting at least until the end of the modern synthesis in the middle of the 20th century. Some would contend, myself included, that the notion of progress still persists to this day in evolutionary biology, but that's beside the point. It is normally assumed that liberal theology saw individual effort, that is, change led by competition, as the driving force behind progress. But as Adrian Desmond and James Moore argue, there was a period in the early 19th century when a less optimistic form of liberalism reigned, and Thomas Malthus's theory regarding population density and so forth was part of this non-progressive viewpoint. Darwin became part of the ideology of progress only of the latter, more confident era of liberalism, or so Desmond and Moore argue. Many secular evolutionary worldview scientists are reluctant to concede that Darwin was a progressionist at all, because they contend themselves, or that they themselves reject the concept of progress as being too value laden. And there's a temptation to assume that the founder of the macroevolutionary movement shares our own perceptions of his theory today, 150 years ago. That's not always the case. Robert John Richards accuses many historians of falling into this trap and thereby ignoring much evidence for Darwin's commitment to the idea of progress, a contention with which I strongly agree. From reading Darwin's notebooks and so forth like that, I contend that he was ardently a progressionist in some Victorian, so to speak, sense. Right. Richard's interpretation fits in nicely with Michael Ruse's thesis on the more general link between biological evolutionism and progressionism, which I do heartily affirm. Most historians now accept that Darwin cannot be seen as a non-progressionist in this late modern sense. So throw that baby out with the bathwater, the modern synthesis onward that tries to belie the notion of progress. Even Ruse, a modern day hero of the secular evolutionary worldview, agrees that progress is there in Darwin and should be there in Darwin if he's read appropriately. Following the Dominican priest biologist Francisco J. Aya, something like that. Again, oddly, one person who's made much effort with the notion of with what I term objective progress in biology. Ruse contends that the concept of progress requires change, and that this, in some sense, involves change in a linear direction. As such, mere cyclical change could not qualify as progress. even though there's constant change and cyclical movements. But Ruse says progress is more than just change. Progress implies that there's change in a certain direction. You must be going somewhere to have progress. He acknowledges that progress is apropos to speak of with regard to evolutionary biology. Progress, he notes, however, is a value notion because progress implies that things are in some sense getting better. But going beyond Aya, Francisco J. Aya, whatever, I'm sorry, but
You're
Ruse
doing great. That's right.
Okay, bro. Ruse stipulates that it is useful to distinguish between evaluation and valuing. Only the latter, that is valuing, is absolute, whereas the former, that is evaluation, occurs against any arbitrarily specified standard. So he's affirming the notion of progress in an evaluative sense. According to Ruse, secular evolutionary worldview, science is Heraclitean, that is always moving. No one would deny this, though conversely, no one would deny that biology moves irregularly most times, now leaping forward, then equilibrating, now leaping forward, then equilibrating, and so forth. Notice hints of my advocation of Stephen Jay Gould's punctuated equilibrium thesis, which I think I've discussed with you before a couple of times. But is there any meaning to this movement of back and forth and then equilibration? Does the back and forth of biology make sense? Is there any pattern to it? Is biology progressive? And if it is, what is the nature of this progress and what is its cause? Speaking of scientists qua scientists, that is excluding the things that scientists say when being self-reflective, they are strongly committed to the process of evolution having sense or making sense and having pattern. In particular, scientists believe in progress of science and biology, that is. And by progress, they mean getting closer to the truth. Moreover, scientists qua scientists are philosophical realists. And by getting closer to the truth, they mean making their theories better correspond to the empirical facts, getting closer to the truth, progress. For example, modern molecular genetics is, in a sense, better than Mendelian genetics because the unit of inheritance, that is, the near particulate DNA molecule, is seen to be in the modern theory of molecular genetics more so critical than it was in just simply, uh, well, it's advanced over a notion of Mendelian genetics. I could say that and be safe. For Ruse, that is Michael Ruse, it is also true that the general progression of science is one which has been accepted by commentators upon science for hundreds of years. At least this is true of those closest to the philosophical end of the spectrum, like him. Although belief in scientific progress has come under attack from radical thinkers within historical, sociological, and literary disciplines. The two most recent commentators on the nature of science or nature of progress in biology specifically are undeniably Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn. As is well known, Popper believes that the mark of science, that is the criterion of demarcation, is falsifiability, which means that science moves forward as scientists face problems, propose tentative refutations, or propose tentative solutions, and then other scientists trying to proverbially knock that theory down, so to speak, and falsify it. That's how science progresses, according to Popper. Even in the process of refutation, however, progress, an evaluative sense of progress, is in fact made, and the body of knowledge grows. Even if a theory is disproven, still the body of knowledge grows, and that is progress in an evaluative sense. Kuhn is at times read to be a non-realist, but Ruse contends that it's better to perhaps read him in a Kantian way, a la Miss Pollock. Right. That is, seeing reality in an important sense defined and created by the inquiring mind. Our minds create reality in the Kuhnian sense, rather. Kuhn, not much different than Popper, shows a virtual commitment to the notion of progress in science and writing, that the analogy that relates the evolution of organisms to the evolution of scientific ideas can be easily pushed too far. But with respect to the issues of this book, it is very nearly perfect. The process described by me as the resolution of revolutions is the selection by conflict within the scientific community of the fittest way to practice future science. The net result of a sequence of such revolutionary selections, separated by periods of normal research, is the wonderfully adapted set of instruments that we call modern scientific knowledge. Successive stages in that developmental process are marked by an increase in articulation and specialization, aka progress. And the entire process may have occurred, as we now suppose biological evolution did, without benefit of a set goal, that is a permanent fixed scientific truth, of which each stage in the development of the scientific knowledge is a better exemplar. Rather, it's evaluative progress. Purportedly, this is a key point, Darwin had no penchant for biological process and regularly excised it from his writings, published at least. I'm reminded of a cautionary statement in one of his notebooks near the beginning of his explorations in biology, never to say higher and lower, quote unquote. I could source that out, but I'm not going to waste the time. For all intents and purposes, this was probably due to his mechanism of selection. In the arm race, what wins is what wins, in so much as it could be the prize specimen, or it could be the foolish simpleton. Either way, it's a crapshoot in a sense. As one who used to interpret Darwin this way, Ruse currently believes that this story is alluring, that is what I just told you about Darwin, but is flat wrong. While it is true that Darwin recognized branching to be a crucial part of the evolutionary process, it is also true that Darwin denied any simple upwardly progressive force in evolution. That Darwin saw that evolution and selection would lead to a kind of relativistic progress where one improves particular adaptations can also be referred to as comparative highness. But it remains true that Darwin thought relativistic progress would morph into an absolute sort of progress, marked by the ever-pervasive rise of complexity. Curiously, Darwin saw humans, especially white European male humans, to be at the proverbial top of the macroevolutionary heap. So Darwin is a mixed bag. He says never say higher or lower, but then he concludes that white European males are at the top of the evolutionary heap. I'm going to skip down a little bit here. I think I'm getting a little redundant. Succinctly, one may confidently say that progress reigns throughout all of evolutionary biology today as a hidden assumption, if not explicit fact, or if not explicitly spoken of. Indeed, macroevolutionary theory is a child of progress, and as a child of progress, and as a child often emulates his parents because he carries some of their characteristics and he's been sired in their home and so forth, so too does modern day evolutionary theory carry forward ideas of the progress worldview from which it was birthed. Indeed, the belief that all organic beings have natural origins and are produced by the normal laws of nature was an idea that started to be accepted from the middle to the end of the 18th century. Ruse claims that it was not by chance that evolution appeared at this time, nor was it by chance that the virtually same idea appeared in France, England, and Germany along the same time frame. After all, the 18th century was one that invented, developed, and promoted the idea of progress. That is, the idea or the belief that it's possible and plausible to improve aspects of existence. And this improvement can come about through human effort. Ruse avers that the birth of the one idea, that is progress, brought forth the birth of another idea, that is macroevolution. Why progress? Ruse queries. In simple terms, it's because the more that was learned of the world of organisms, the more people realized that it was a world of change in a particular direction. There was, for example, an ever-growing data set of biological phenomena that seemed to point to perpetual becoming rather than dormant being. Additionally, there was the fossil record with its revelations of yesterday's organisms being more simple than today's organisms and so forth of that nature. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying, by affirming what Ruse exclamates at the end of his book that I'm covering herein. Progress reigns in evolutionary biology, period, exclamation point. Thank you for your time.
Really excellent.
Progress.
Are you taking questions now, or?
Yes, I'm open to questions, Mr. Walker. I am indeed.
All right, so I'm going to ask if your thesis is that progress reigns, and if so, what that means. I'm just asking you to boil it down.
Gotcha. Well, I believe that progress, if it doesn't reign, it definitely has a strong appearance in secular evolutionary world, especially I should say in evolutionary biology today. So I agree with Ruse in so much as he contends that progress is everywhere evaluatively used in evolutionary biology. Whether progress reigns, I guess, definitively in the end, I think that's somewhat of more of an open question. Only because there's always a whip and flow of progression, and then also reversion, you could say, in a sense, in terms of complexity and so forth. On the mean, however, I would agree with Ruse that progress does reign, because we've come from monad to man, so to speak, to copy one of the titles of his famous work, Monad to Man, but from Ruse back in, I think, 96. Right. Does that answer your question, Mr. Marger?
Yes, for now, I want to give other people a chance, but thank you for
Yes, sir.
that clarification.
Mr. Bridges.
Oh, thank you. First, it is quite a interesting presentation that it caused a lot of thoughts for me. So thank you. I was wondering if you could sort of provide a bit more clarity for well, I'm sort of thinking as three ideas of progress. One that European philosophy had much before the theory of evolution, sort of like Hegel ranking societies as approaching perfection. Two is I don't think it's too difficult to sort of see complexity in the from single cell organisms to us. But in this second idea that's sometimes called evolutionism, which is the progress among different groups of people that the early anthropologists sort of subscribed to, and then how you kind of shift to evaluative progress in the scientific field itself, contrasting Thomas Kuhn with maybe a more objective type. I just was wondering how those shifts were occurring in your mind.
Very, very excellent question, sir. I mean, please understand that this presentation was based on a 36, 37 page paper. Yeah. And I cut out a bunch of stuff, and I reformulated a bunch of stuff on the fly, and then even so on and so forth like that. But nevertheless, how do I perceive progress in philosophy, as you first alluded to, and then progress and evolutionary? Please, can you repeat your second premise again?
Yeah. So we had a sort of a progress of the early anthropologists when we kind of listed savage, primitive, and then European for the black. And so we kind of saw in the early anthropologists, Tyler and Fraser, they ranked the societal groups.
Right.
And then we sort of also did it religiously in the sense of animistic, polytheistic, monotheistic, scientific.
Mm-hmm.
And then how you are kind of, because you did categorize the notions of progress. You said, okay, this is what I'm talking about, but how did you see the overall concept relating, if at all?
Well, relating to progress in evolutionary biology or in secular evolutionary science? Is that what you're asking?
Just the notion of evaluative progress versus this earlier notions of ontological or sociological.
Okay, very well, very well. Excellent question indeed, sir. I think I understand better what you're asking for now. I think that with Darwin, empirical concerns begin to take dominance. Although evolution goes back to the pre-Socratics and things like that, I mean, you can find intimations of it there. But with Darwin setting forth a testable and also a scientifically verifiable or falsifiable, to use a Popperian sense, right? Yeah, right. But I think with Darwin, things became more evaluative and not based upon qualitative matters. It became more evaluative based upon what you can quantify, if you will. And I think that's the differentiation there that I'm trying to point out. Right? It's not as qualitative in that sense. Does that make sense to you at all, Dr. Bridges?
Yeah. I personally am concerned about if it's a relative nature of progress that just gets more if it's more relative, if we can actually have some objectivity in the evaluative sense, and if we do get objectivity, then how do we apply it back to the sociological, or it would be.
Wow. Well, see, you're asking me questions that are somewhat outside of my field there, but nevertheless, if we're working on an evaluative type idea of progress that's quantifiable, if you will, how do you go backwards and treat the non-qualified or non-quantified topics? In other words, the anthropology that preceded philosophy and so forth like that. That's a puzzling question to me, and I don't think I have a good answer for that right now. I mean, I want to say that we could evaluate, well, I'm going to punt on that, Dr. Bridges, only because I haven't thought that through. Is that okay, sir?
Yeah, no. Thank you for taking. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, Bradford, I might have a few questions if you don't mind. Empirically speaking, change in nature is obvious, but there seems to be there are various ways in which you could say that it develops linearly. You've used examples such as complexity, for instance. but why not say, I mean, I'm really playing devil's advocate here. Why not say that nature is, at least after some certain point, is regressing as
Well,
opposed to progressing? I
well,
mean,
I think there will be a point, and I think I'll lay my cards on the table. I think there will be a point where nature starts to regress. Indeed, I will. I mean, indeed, I do. I don't. I'm not sure that we've hit that point yet because we still see in our own mammalian evolution, although nature itself may be degrading, our there are segments, there are pockets within nature, such that are still progressing. Does that make sense to you, Mr.
sure,
Marlowe?
sure. Yeah.
Right. So I don't, but I think there will become a point to use. Let me see, to use Desjardins' terminology there of the omega point, if you will. And
Yeah.
I'm mixing discourses here, but I'm trying to be somewhat multi disciplinary in that sense, so to speak. But yeah, I think there will be an omega point wherein evolution ceases, if you will, and then by default, you only have available regression. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Marlowe?
Yeah, I don't think Desjardins thinks that there's going to be a regression. Of course, he has a theological
Right,
picture about the omega point, but
right.
I take your point. But one interesting thing about Desjardins, of course, is that he measures progress against an endpoint, and that's not the case for most evolutionary biologists. Uh, so to use a trite expression, how do we know we're progressing if we don't know where we're going? And so, but I don't know. I mean, in many ways, of course, nature already is regressing. Take the number of species. So, I mean, if you look at complexity in terms of diversity, then we're already, of course, taking significant backward steps in the past few decades.
Right.
But and then in terms of adaptability, the sheer number of animals has decreased a great deal. But of course, I suppose the counter argument is, well, this is measuring progress from too narrow a viewpoint, right? That who knows where this will take us, or we might be simply be mistaken about the measures that we apply to evolution. And for instance, I mean, why is I could see specialization as being useful for adaptation, but specialization in itself might not be a mark of progress. Some people have argued this about diversity, for instance. Right, diversity itself is not, a virtue. But so I don't know. I find one of the most interesting things I found about your paper, and I think this is a fascinating topic, Bradford. I really think this is a worthwhile project if we could only get clear about what we consider progress. But but it does sound as though the very notion of progress is, for most of these evolutionary biologists, an artifact of the theory, itself an artifact of the theory.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would, yes, sir. Yes, sir, I would.
Yeah, and I guess that connects to the larger point that Andrew was making, that there have been other standards of progress and so forth. That's just, I don't know if that actually helps your arguments.
Right. Well, the idea behind the evaluative progress is relativistic in a sense, but it's not totally relative. Does that make sense? It's relativistic with regard to where you're at that time versus a standard where you were previously, or where nature was previously. So it's evaluative relativistically there, so to speak. Right.
Yeah.
Right. In that sense, I mean, as far you pointed out a very good, you make a very good point there, that specialization could be seen as progress, but then again, when you specialize, the diversity, if you will, decreases, so to speak. Right. But it depends on what you're using as your standard, Mr. Marlowe.
Yeah.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I want to, Grant, if you don't mind, I think I want to ask a similar question differently. Also, I think it's not accurate to say that Flew is a believer. My my understanding of his position is that he, is open to the possibility
Okay.
that he might have been wrong about God not existing, which
Okay.
is like the
I got
most
I got a little carried away there.
the most subtle way, right, for a
Yeah.
philosopher to say,
Yeah.
maybe I was wrong.
Maybe I was
Anyways,
wrong.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And I actually asked him, so
Yeah, really.
at dinner, so is this really your view?
Yeah,
And have you had a change of heart? And he said, yeah, the change of heart was that he's open to the possibility of theism.
Okay.
He said, yeah,
okay.
that was it.
but
But I
I
mean,
think,
still, that's a significant movement, I
Oh,
think.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
well, I read your paper the last couple of days, and I actually wore a shirt for you today. It's Jesus riding a dinosaur, which I just thought was
Look at
appropriate.
there. Look at there.
Anyways, so my question is, and I think Grant, you really, I mean, I heard it in Andrew, and then I heard it in Grant, and I hear it a little bit differently in my head, which is, um, don't scientists discover the things they look for? And so, in other words, and I think Grant, you the way that you said it, which I'm not going to say it correctly, how the the sense of progress is really integrated into the work that's being done, and I mean, the hard part is to see what it is, independent of that. Or I might ask the question differently: why is science secular?
Why is science secular? Okay, well, science, going back to the foundation of science, if you will. I mean, the modern Western version of science, anyway, in the 17th and 18th centuries, right? But regardless, science wanted to be put on equitable foundations that anyone could approach from, and then access the same data with, or the same conclusion, you could say, without any presuppositions. Now, and that was the goal. That was the goal. And the way that science has been progressing, to use that term again, is that the best way to get that goal is to be value neutral. But as even Ruse indicates, in which I heartily affirm myself, even value neutrality is value laden. Right? But because, I mean, as you said, I mean, as you pointed out there, Jeremy, and as Grant sort of alluded to, and then even going back to Mr. Dr. Bridges, scientists do find what they look for. I mean, you're right. So you've got to have presuppositions prior to doing experimentation, prior to doing philosophizing based upon those experimentations, if you will. Yes, sir. So, but the best way to do that, science thinks, and as a former scientist, I still consider myself a scientist because I'm still broadly in the area of science. But nevertheless, the best way that we've decided to do that is by reducing as much as possible, reducing as much as possible, right? And especially with regard to our presuppositions, in regard to our worldview, and with regard to our beliefs and so forth. But but of course, we're all human. All scientists are human. Well, at least right now, anyway. Well, there's some robots doing work, but I mean, but still, they're programmed by humans. So ultimately, it goes back to humanity. But we're all humans, and we all have our presuppositions and our preferences and our. And,
So assuming that it's not possible to be value neutral, let's just assert that for a moment. What's possible? What's wrong with the picture then? What's wrong with the picture of a physicist or a biologist, doing the kind of work where they're setting aside as much, we'll use the word presuppositions, so let's say theological ones or whatever they might be, right? I guess my question is, what's wrong with that process?
Because
Or are you saying there's something wrong with it? I guess I'm not clear about what the issue is.
I'm not exactly saying there's something wrong with it but I'm just simply acknowledging the idea that hidden presuppositions always have a way of surfacing. In the secular evolutionary worldview, for example, as I termed it in this paper, it sneaks in theology, but it does so at a presuppositional level and not explicitly. Secular evolutionary biology is still today laden with progress, which goes back to a Christian worldview, which has not been surpassed, even though secular evolutionary biology attempts to do away with the presuppositions of the worldview.
All right, what you just said was the clearest expression of that so far.
Okay.
So, so I just want to comment that
I'm bumbling through that.
No. What you just organized right there was like, okay, right? Because it almost sounds akin to, the critique in the academic study of religion where we say, the taxonomies that we have for how we talk about, even how we teach whatever we teach, right? Whether it's Eastern traditions or what, like those taxonomies we inherited are rooted, right, in another idea, another historical idea. And like we are doing the work to say, okay, right, that's a problem because it's Christian, basically. So anyways, I just want to say that right there, since we're recording this, no.
Yeah, that made it clear. Yeah.
that brought it together for me.
Thank you. Ms. Block, you have anything to say, or Mr. Marley, you want to follow up or anything?
I think Andrew has raised it, but I don't know, Marlene, if you had questions, or Robin.
If someone else does. Yeah, I had one more, but I'll wait my turn.
Yeah, I couldn't get my thing unmuted. I just have a couple. One thing that I found interesting, if I understood you correctly, at one point you kind of stepped back and looked at how, in the process of doing science itself, there's something like an evolutionary progress. There's something like progress, and you named it. Like the progress was something like, in some cases, getting closer to the truth. And, it just occurred to me that, so there's, if you want to think of the data that's out there, and there's the process of doing science, what if getting closer to the truth in that progressive way within the activity of science, what if the truth is that there is more like a kind of relative chaos in the material that we're looking at as scientists? Now, that seems to be complicated, though, by the fact that even the facts, what counts as a fact or what counts as data, is in some sense, determined by our worldview within a certain science. I don't know. I just found that sort of parallel that kind of is not really a parallel between the activity or the process of evolution within science and then the process that you're looking out onto, whether it's biological evolution or whatever. And it made me think of a book. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's kind of an old book by Stephen Toulmin. It's called Human Understanding. And it's the title something like On the Use and Evolution of Concepts. And what he does is it's a big book. He takes the Darwinian evolutionary model and applies it to understanding disciplines and the evolution of concepts and directedness and progress, et cetera, within disciplines. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
I'm not, no.
Yeah, it's just
I'll look into that though, right?
Stephen Toulmin,
Toulmin.
T-O-U-L.
Is it like sounds T-O-O-L, man?
T-O-U-L-M-I-N.
I recognize that name.
Yeah, just human understanding. Anyway, so I just found that interesting, and that parallel there, if you want to speak to that process within doing science and in the subject matter of science. There's two sort of evolutionary streams, it seems, in a way. And then the other thing was just, I find the idea of worldview interesting because, I think this follows from what you guys have been saying, is that if, you mentioned Kuhn, for example, there are these revolutions in science. So the worldview itself alters. And so once that worldview changes, then what counts as a fact, even what we might recognize as progress or directedness or explanation,
That
is very
changes the
different.
factor
Yeah,
too. Right.
very different once that worldview changes. So it just strikes me that the notion of progress is so like entangled at all these different levels. It's pretty interesting, you know. But anyway, I don't know if you have anything to say, particularly about the point about the evolutionary process as it is unfolding in the conceptual activity itself and in the material that the you know, scientists or the community is looking at. I mean, in a sense, the scientists are in that process too, in the broad view. I mean, they're part of an evolutionary process.
Right. So you got evolutionists studying evolution who are evolving themselves, right?
Well, yeah, their thought has a certain evolutionary structure to it, perhaps.
Right.
I don't know. And maybe their progress indicates that in what they're looking at, there is no progress, possibly. I don't know.
Very interesting. I mean, I have to concentrate about that, right?
I don't know.
I mean, no, you've given me fodder for thought. You have. I appreciate that, Miss.
Yeah, that's very stimulating paper, though.
Thank you. I hope you gotten by the book to which it corresponds. I need the dollar.
Okay, yeah, you need those royalties.
I need the $1.75 you get, right, or whatever it is. But Dr. Bridges.
This is hopefully I could articulate this question. Thank you for your willingness to try to get my questions. Sometimes they're kind of a bit on a tangent.
Esoteric, right?
So in my critical thinking class, we have a chapter called pseudoscience, in which we try to teach the student to distinguish it from science. And I've often found that so much of what is called pseudoscience, right? They include, okay, feng shui, Taoistic, astrology, acupuncture, basically so much of Confucian Taoist religion, Indian religion, all these things are just considered pseudosciences. And so I was kind of wondering, suppose instead of this secular worldview or this Christian worldview, if pluralism became the uncontested dominant worldview, would there be as much of a distinction between science and pseudoscience? What do you think?
Very, very good question again, Dr. Bridges. I don't think there would be much of a distinction there. I think that the plurality or the pluralistic worldview that you make mention of would sort of level the playing field and generate, if you will, a level playing field for pseudo, at least what we call pseudo, and then, you know, real science, right? But yeah, I think probably that would level the playing field. I mean, after all, if these pseudosciences, if you want to speak to them a little while, they are usually psychologically oriented. So they have effects, but they're psychological effects, and therefore they're deemed pseudosciences. If I'm speaking appropriately to what you're referring to in Taoism and Confucian thought and so forth like that, am I approximating what you're intentioning there, Dr. Bridges?
Yeah, they give us three characteristics: is they appeal to mystery, they don't fit into the contemporary scientific framework,
empirical framework, right?
Yeah, and then there's a third one I can't, but the appeal to mystery, I think, might shift if we have different categories of what might be mysterious. I don't know.
Well, what could you refer to as mystery if science is trying to find the answer of answers, so to speak? What do they find mysterious?
Oh my goodness, so many things. Andrew, please tell the story of the little kids reading.
Oh, well, I mean, both the supposition and the phenomena, so like astrology, for example, how does the position of the stars when you're born affect your destiny? Like, there's not really an answer. It's just an assumption.
Right. Well, I go back to the idea that that's a pseudoscience, and then
Yeah.
it's an assumption based upon psychology. I mean, it reduces to a psychological orientation towards something. It's not empirical, and therefore, in my worldview, it's not even adjunctly, so or empirical in a sense. I mean, right? So I view that's a psychological pseudoscience in my estimation, right?
But would the pluralism then just assume something like in the Chinese system, she is just kind of assumed. And so that would not be an unquestionable assumption. That would be a premise. And then you'd say, okay, if it was assumed, then, and then
If
things would
plurality
follow.
was assumed, plurality in the sense of accepting multiple interpretations or accepting multiple um, epistemologies, or how are you using pluralism
Yeah,
there? Like,
yeah, so multiple coherent epistemologies in which the center might not be challenged.
okay. Yes, I affirm what you're trying to move me toward there. Right. I think that would open up avenues if you were to accept multiple epistemologies, what have you, for the derivation of truth, for example, that you could open up yourself to finding scientific truth in what's ordinarily contained within pseudoscience. And I think that'd be plausible. Yes, sir, I do.
I
Thank you.
guess.
And,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. I just want to ask you about something you just said, Andrew. Okay, I'm trying to write it down. Multiple coherent epistemologies in which the center is not challenged. Is that how you put it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, well, one of the essays I've just been reading and rereading is Derrida's infamous essay from 1966, which is called, by a lot of people, The Beginning of Deconstruction, Structure, Sign, and Play, in which he starts talking for the first time about the challenging of the center of Western epistemology, philosophy, theology, all of that stuff. So, I mean, it at least that long ago, but really at least as far back as Nietzsche and probably much farther back than that, we were challenging the center of that system that we consider the dominant system, and Brad talks about it in his paper, the Christian system. We do challenge the center of the Christian system. So are you saying that what you're seeing is a pluralism in which the only system that's the center of which is being challenged is Christianity? Why aren't we challenging the center of these other systems too, from within, say people who are within those disciplines?
I see your point, Miss Robin. Right. Okay.
I'm just asking. I mean, I want to know what both of you say about that.
Well, I mean, personally, I kind of hold an agnostic opinion to coherence of epistemologies, but I think if that's the true framework, there are things that you don't really challenge. You have to begin somewhere. Right. And usually with something like here, I think in our political landscape, it might be the equality principle. Is that something we begin with and don't challenge and therefore build a framework? Or would that be something we challenge? If we challenged it, would democracy fall apart, for example?
Go ahead.
And then, so would we do that maybe in a Abrahamic system? Would we have, okay, God is that center that we don't challenge? In a Taoist system, would it be the Tao? In a dharmic system, would it be karma? We have to have something at the center and then build out.
I mean, I'm sorry, but speaking from Derrida, he would totally disagree with that. He would say, in order to find the thing, well, that you have to challenge the center. No system can be, we can't say this system we're going to have God as the center or have anything as the center, because we aren't going to progress. I guess that's the word. We're not going to find anything out if we can't challenge the system of everything. And I mean, the center of anything. And it's just that the Western system is the sitting duck. And I think this is what, strangely, it's coming back to me how often I heard Anselm say this. He would say that the problem with Eastern philosophies, shall we say, of religion, are that they just didn't start as long ago as Christianity did in trying to articulate a philosophical theology for themselves. They're very, very undeveloped in that way, and they need to be developed so that they can go through the whole process of self-interrogation that the Western system went through. So he wasn't trying to say they shouldn't exist at all, because that's never where he came from on Eastern religion. He was trying to say there needs to be an articulation. Yeah, and there has to be once that articulation is so obvious that it's in your face and it's bugging you, like what happened with Christianity, then you have enough of a foundation to go back and start to actually challenge what the center is. I mean, that's just also, I'll throw in here something that I wrote down that I wanted to include in my question. Grant, you said in passing, are you still there, Grant?
Yeah.
No, I know you're there, Brad, but is Grant still there?
Oh, okay.
You just said this in passing, and I scribbled it down, and I can't even remember what you were saying before this. But when you were talking to Brad, you said diversity is not a value.
Well, it's just been a debate among environmentalists. We often treat diversity itself as a value, and people ask why. What is there something intrinsic about diversity in nature that makes it worth having?
Well, diversity spawns, if I may interject here. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Miss Robin. But diversity spawns innovation, and it also spawns creativity. Even beyond that, diversity spawns innovation, right? In nature. I'm speaking of nature, not on a socio-political way. But Miss Robin, I hope I didn't interrupt you and make you lose your train of thought.
Hello, Robin.
I think she's frozen.
Oh, she froze.
Look, froze.
Robin, you're frozen.
Oops, we lost her.
Sure.
She'll probably log on again.
Probably log back in, yeah.
But yeah, but that's much clearer, Brad. For the, I mean, if diversity, it's difficult to say that it would advance the interests of evolution, but yeah, diversity might increase adaptability for in given environments, for instance. Yeah. So if you have
that's what Darwin and Huxley referred to as adaptiveness, right?
I see.
Right.
I see. So if I had 10 bird species who could compete in a given environment for a particular niche in an environment, certainly the odds are better that one of them will succeed if I have more diversity among them. You know, so
yeah.
So I mean, that might be an argument for diversity being, if you like, a value that's worth advancing in some way.
Yeah. Well, that borders on my dissertation there, right? I mean, you're like dancing around it. You know what I mean?
Oh.
I'm not joking at all, right? Because I do argue that diversity increases and complexity increases as a result of that diversity, right? Yeah. So diversity and complexity then are the goal And I'm sort of getting off our topic earlier
Yeah,
from what I presented today, but diversity and complexity are the goal of the superintending deity, which I refer to as God.
I see.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I'm working toward in my dissertation.
yeah.
Right.
People often speak, though, without reference to God, as saying as though we have some sort of duty to promote diversity, and they speak about it as though evolution has interests of its own, that there's a teleology somehow in nature, apart from the interests of God. And I think, to me, that sounds misguided. That sounds misplaced.
There's no foundation for the teleology if you take out the assumption of a God,
yeah,
right? I mean, because then you just have random processes
yeah,
that are randomly colliding and randomly interacting, and there's no progressionism. There's no
yes,
teleology to it, as you point out there. Right.
yeah.
Question, if I'm wondering, Bradford, if you could explain your difference between panentheism and pantheism, because I'm looking at your definition of panentheism. God is the totality of reality. However, while God is in all things, God is more than all things at the same time. So I guess my question has to do with parsing that out, because that could be pantheism
Right.
itself.
In
Your definition.
my excuse me, I don't want to cut you off, but in my version of pantheism, it encompasses pantheism. But then, if I can make a proper circle here, that's pantheism there. Well, the panentheism encompasses, if you will, the pantheism, but it stipulates that God is more than all things in which he's found. Does that make sense at all, Mr. Marr? There's panentheism indicates that there's some ontological reality outside of existence, if you will, of existence, and that ontological reality is what we commonly refer to as God. That's
Okay,
outside, but permeates everything within reality and existence.
so of course that ontological reality is kind of undefined other than existing in all things, but being something beyond it in some certain sense. That could be the Christian God. That could fit into a Hindu framework. It could, for some people, might even try to fit into a Buddhist framework.
And I think that's one of the attractions of that viewpoint.
Well, except it leaves God nebulous, what God you're talking about. So let me just, so is God evil? Because evil exists. I think most of us would agree that evil exists. So is God evil? That's my question.
Does God contain evil? In other words, right? I think that
Well,
all things are contained within God. So ipso facto, God does contain evil within Him, right?
okay.
From which evil has expressions in His creatures and in His creation, if you will, or in the natural world, as I like to refer to it as. Right. So yes, I think that God, the nebulous figure that you spoke of earlier, would contain evil within him. Yes, indeed, I do.
All right.
I think that we see that most clearly. We see that most clearly in the assumption of evil personified in Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, if you want to go there with me, I mean, and I'm a confessional, methodical Catholic, right? But, so I do contend that Jesus Christ, in some sense, was either designated or born as the Son of God. And I fall on the previous spectrum of that, as I think I've argued before within this group, designated to be the Son of God, and then thereafter subsumed into the deity. That's my contention. So evil was present in Jesus of Nazareth, the one that we often call the Christ. The Christ. I mean, assuredly that toddler yelled selfishly for things. Assuredly, the toddler got mad and hit his best buddy. Right? I mean, he was a toddler. That's what toddlers do. So there was a semblance of evil in Jesus of Nazareth, and that was subsumed into God. So yes, I think it's gone full circle, and that God does contain evil within him. Yes, I do.
Oh, so two quick questions that I'm not sure what to say at this point. So I'll just say it won't be said well. I think the question is, does evil exist? Like, that's certainly a complicated question, because I'm not
Very
even sure
complicated.
what the exist is tied to.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't
That's a
know.
very good question there. I mean,
For me that
it goes back to a Platonic idea, there being a good God and a bad God. I mean, I'm simplifying things out there, but no, Jeremy, can you please speak on? I want to accurately grasp what you're saying
well,
before
I'm just noting that I would need much more conversation
okay.
to just understand John's question more, or John's statement more. But I
Right.
think the other piece, the toddler piece, I think this is very interesting. I don't think what my toddler does is evil, right? So, and
People they slap and bite and things like
no, I think that's I think that's a very strange way to talk about a child. But let me give you an example of why I think this is weird, or it's an anecdote. But my former spouse, my former sister-in-law, they had children, and this was many years ago now. And so one day I was at their house, and they said, "Isn't it?" And I think this was their first child, and maybe he was like a year and a half or something, 2 years. And the husband said to me, it's weird. His sin nature is coming out already. And I kind of looked at him and I thought, I have no idea what that means. Now, like, I know what that means in the language game of evangelical conservative fundamentalism. Like, I know what that means, and I understand, like, the beliefs that are associated with it in a theological sense. But in a much kind of philosophical way, I thought that I can't understand what you're saying. And it was peculiar for me. And so I guess it was interesting how your example of the toddler took me way back to this weird moment where it felt, and I think later I read Marilyn McCord Adams' book on, like, the book that was really horrendous evils, the one that it's really interesting, right? I mean, I think she does. She really works through that question. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just wanted to pause for a moment because I thought that there's a lot we could say about that, and I don't
that's a
know.
huge discussion,
And
I'm just mentioning it.
I'll own, if it's just me has that question, then that's fine. So
No, honestly. Now, do I think that comes with intent? Does the toddler express evil with intent? Now, intent complexifies things because, historically speaking, the church has been, the church has determined that evil cannot be done without intent. Okay, well, I view selfishness to be an evil. I view selfishness to be an evil, and toddlers are ipso facto selfish at their root. And I'm not speaking of a sin nature. I'm not speaking of anything like that. That's just human nature. That's humanity. I mean, that's human nature. But evaluatively, so to speak, that has been determined to be evil in, in religious circles. I mean, I may be muddying up the waters again, but I mean that's just that's where I'm at today. Dr. Bridges.
Yeah, maybe I can sort of approach this in a different way as kind of a aspect of another question. Oh no, you might like him, Kurt Vonnegut. He was really sort of cynical, and so he wrote a book called Galapagos, in which most everyone dies of a virus. A few people are stranded on the Galapagos Island. Millions of years go by, and we sort of, most would say, de-evolve into like a monkey otter type species that doesn't have opposable thumbs. But he says that that's an improvement because we can't go to war, and we don't really have an evil nature in the same way. It's a very communal species. And so I think that he would argue that any notion of evil or progress, or if we have any type of moral teleology, that we might be able to accomplish that by getting away from this complexity. Sort of like maybe elephants can enact the gospel a bit better than human beings. And so my question was about this notion of how we would view other species, this notion of evil, this notion of progress. Now, he was really cynical. He was in the bombing of Dresden, and he took a negative view after World War II of a type of progress. But just sort of that idea of maybe we could get this concept of evil out of our ontology by looking at another species.
Well, no doubt about it. When a lion eats another lion because he's hungry, that's not evil per se. That's nature working, if you will. The appellation of evil comes when we've got when we've got developed minds enough to where we can say that that's right or that's wrong, right? I mean, if that makes sense to you at all, right? Because again, the lion killing the inferior lion because he's hungry, that's just nature. That's what happens in nature. So that's not evil per se. So to use your elephants without opposable thumbs, I think is the way you put it, right? Right, yeah. Anyway, I don't think that they're evil. No, I don't. I mean, I think it's impossible for animals lower than humanity to be, well, I shouldn't say impossible, because there are times when my kitty cat plays with a mouse just to play with the mouse. You know, I mean, plays with the mouse with her, you know, with her mouth and eating on the thing, and then just sitting there watching it, you know, lay back or swaddle back and forth, so to speak, and she's playing with it. That may in fact be evil there, because she's not doing it to eat. She's just doing it for play. She's killing for play. That may very well be an evil in human or in
at the
yes.
risk of being quite wicked, I wanted to return to John's question, if I might, because it's just a definitional issue, and I wonder also, because it's my impression, I may be mistaken, that pantheism and panentheism are incompatible theories. I mean, pantheism is the notion that God is identical to all of nature,
Okay.
whereas panentheism is the idea that God is present or infused in all of nature. Yeah. So panentheism would not then subsume pantheism.
That's my error, right? I mean,
okay, so we
being
just
a
wanted
little
to
sloppy there, right? I mean, I was trying to shoot from the hip there about how to conceive concentric circles, for example.
Yes, I see.
I mean, and that was a bad analogy, and I agree with you, soon to be Dr. Marlowe, right? I mean,
well,
Professor Marlowe.
not soon enough, but yes. Thank you.
So I humbly withdraw that mistaken
okay.
analogy, right? Mistaken idea.
That's good. I don't know if that addresses John's question, but
well, let me just chime in. I'm not clear at all what the panentheistic God is. It seems like he's a plethora, or she or it is a plethora of deities and non-deities. Whatever has ever existed in the minds of man, since humans have the ability to conjure up things and try to understand and know what's out there. could be divine. So I have no idea concretely what this panentheistic God is. He or she or it almost seems to be a pluralist. Everything goes. So that's my question, is that how do we get beyond that?
Of a pluralist God. Well, I contend that we can get beyond that perhaps by at least I do in my own thinking. I stipulate that the Holy Spirit, that is the Spirit of God, so forth like that, is ontologically constitutive of all reality. Now, in that person, if you will, and I'm using using Chalcedonian definitions there, but in the person and work of the Holy Spirit, God is present, God the Father, if you will. And I don't want to get off into this because I'm unorthodox and I'll be considered a heretic. But nevertheless, I think that the Spirit is the ultimate reality of all of the Godhead, so to speak. And I think that the Spirit permeates the natural world and is included in all things. And then if this spirit, this ever pervading spirit throughout the natural world is then also more than the natural world. And that's what I was trying to say by the concentric circles, and I agree with soon to be Dr. Marla regarding my error there. I was shooting from the hip, but nevertheless, pantheism, God is constitutively, so to speak, or constitutive with reality. With panentheism, God is in all reality, but also more than at the same time. I feel like I'm repeating myself because I'm not sure how to approach this question. Somebody else probably can do it a lot better than I can.
Well, I think you're integrating your Christian thought with panentheism is what I see you doing. Mm-hmm. So if somebody approached it without the prior preconception of Christianity or a prior preconception of God and tried to work themselves up to what is God from a panentheist conception, they might end up with a smorgasbord.
I won't do that at all. No, I won't. No.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it'll be a smorgasbord, as you put it, right? Yeah, I like that idea. Actually, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's about all that y'all want to comment, I reckon, right? I mean, it's getting near 5, and our representatives have been depleted, you know what have you. But if any of y'all have any last minute questions, I'd love to take them. Right, but
I just want to say thanks for the presentation.
Oh, indeed, yes, thank you.
Yeah. It was helpful, Bradford. Some of your definitions, it's something that I think a freshman class could read and understand it. And then the question goes, well, where do you want to take this? Are you arguing for progress, and what type of progress versus other areas? We could be wiped out either by a pandemic or by a meteor or something coming from outside of ourselves, and progress would immediately be eliminated.
I mean, it's happened before at least 7 times. At least 7 times in the history of the biota that is species, so to speak, on Earth. It's happened at least 7 times, right? 7 great mass extinctions, and it possibly could happen again. But that is relative, though. It's relativistic, because then assuredly some other species would start to arise and adapt, or many other species would start to arise and adapt, and then we somewhat cyclical, right? Yeah, somewhat cyclical in that sense. But that's why I refer to as relativistic evaluational progress, so to speak, because it's not a one and done, right? I mean, because as you say, Mr. Malger, there could be a meteorite that impacts us, but I contend that would simply unleash the hound, so to speak, and allow progress to be reinstantiated again. And then we go through another complexification of matter and so forth. Yes, sir.
And I'm assuming, can I assume that you would believe that God is in control of whatever happens or not in some sense? So
No.
it's random?
I do not believe that God controls his creation. God loves us unconditionally, but his love is uncontrolling. To make a plug to my friend Thomas J. Ord.
Well, how would we know if all life was wiped out by some gigantic meteor or whatever from outer space that sent the Earth off of its cycle and made it uninhabitable for life? How could we just assume that life would reappear?
Well, because life is going to be organic-based life will be found elsewhere in this planetary system that we call the universe. And then we can get into multiverses, and I'm not going to complexify the conversation with that, but nevertheless, we've already found intimations of organic-based life on other planets. I mean, hell, just last week I was reading something about Venus, perhaps having some sort of organic-based life, right? And then, of course, Mars is always a peculiarity, right? And even the moon and so forth like that. Although, well, anyway, yeah, I'm not going to get into intergalacticism or what have you, but yeah, I no at no time in history has it occurred that, at least as far as we can discern anyway, that a meteorite has impacted the Earth to such a degree so as to make it uninhabitable. I think that would be a meteorite the size of an Earth to knock it off its axis, which is the terminology that you're hinting at there, to knock it off its axis and completely obliterate the possibility of life arising again. And that, sir, that by definition would be burnt up in our atmosphere before it hit us, and it would not be as big as it was previously after going through our atmosphere and getting burned up. It might still be large, but it won't be as big, and therefore I do not think that it's possible to knock it off the axis per se, rendering life unimaginable thereafter. That's just that, and I'm ignorant of a lot of things about astronomy and so forth like that in physics, but that's my understanding there. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bradford. That was intellectually helpful, your presentation.
Great. Well, Bradford, I want to remind you that we have recorded this meeting, and I will post that. I'll let you know when it's up online for you, and so you can review it.
In which I want to, because I want to cogitate on all the things y'all have said.
Oh, I know it's difficult to be the presenter and actually take notes. Reflect. You can't reflect.
At this moment, it's been uploaded to YouTube, and you're a YouTube star.
Oh,
there's already 100 hits.
Right.
You're joking? Oh, okay.
He's joking.
Yes.
Don't worry about it. They're just Russian bots. So.
Right.
You're on TikTok.
How apropos.
boy, if I were in that position, I would wish for some giant meteor to hit the planet and and end my misery. But okay, so well, I guess are there any more comments, questions, or remarks? Thank you, everyone, for a great
I appreciate
discussion, and thank you especially,
Right.
Bradford, for
Thanks, Brad.
producing this version for us and then discussing it with us. We really appreciate it. Okay, so have a good week, everyone. We'll
Nice seeing you guys.
see you. And John, you know, if you have any
y'all.
questions, John, send me a note, and we'll work. You know, can discuss next week's adventure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Bye.
Thank you. I'll see you guys.
you bet. Bye.